What are you doing?
I'm testing my reflexes.
No, this video is about reflexive verbs.
Oh, reflexive verbs. Why didn't you say so? Hello, and welcome to this video all about using reflexive verbs in Spanish. Using reflexive verbs can sometimes confuse non-native speakers, but the truth is, these are totally straightforward once you get to know them. In this video, we are going to look at what reflexive verbs are, how to use them, and learn about two different types of reflexive verbs you can use. So you're probably wondering by now, what are reflexive verbs? To put it simply, reflexive verbs are verbs which indicate that the verb's action remains with the subject or that they are somehow affected by the action. For example, when a person performs an action for or on themselves. You can always identify reflexive verbs because they always include the reflexive pronoun se at the end of the AR, ER, IR endings in the infinitive form. Reflexive verbs are a great way to improve your Spanish speaking skills. They let you talk about yourself and are used far more commonly in Spanish than in English. So let's dig into how to use them. How to use the Spanish reflexive. First off, in order to use Spanish reflexive verbs, they need reflexive pronouns to make the subject and the object of the verb the same figure. Without them, the verb won't make any sense. Let's take a look at the reflexive pronouns for each subject. The subject yo has the reflexive pronoun me. Tú is te. Nosotros has the ending nos. And usted, él, ella, ustedes, and ellos, ellas all have the same ending se. Once you know these endings, using them in a sentence is straightforward. You just need to know where to place them. Reflexive pronouns are typically placed before conjugated verbs. For example, tú te afeitas todas las semanas. You shave yourself every week. Or we have yo me despierto a las 6 de la mañana. I wake myself up at 6 a.m. You can see how the two pronouns te and me were placed before the verbs in those examples. For negative commands, the reflexive pronoun is placed between no and the conjugated verb. No se preocupen, todo está bien. Don't worry, guys, everything is fine. Quick tip, there are 3 exceptions where reflexive pronouns don't have to be placed before the conjugated verbs. Regular commands, imperativo, progressive verbs, ing verbs, and infinite forms of the verb. Now we've covered a basic explanation of reflexive verbs. We can explore the different types in more detail. There are 3 categories of reflexive verbs, but we'll be looking at 2 main ones in this video: reciprocal and natural. Reciprocal reflexives describe an action being performed by 2 or more people simultaneously and normally on each other. For example, Patricia y Ana se maquillan antes de salir. Patricia and Anna put makeup on each other before going out. Natural reflexives are easily identified as reflexive verbs since the pronoun se is attached to the infinitive. For example, me arrepiento de todo lo que hice. I regret myself for all I have done. The third is non-reflexives, but we don't have to worry about that right now. You can read more about it in the blog post later if you're interested. Remember, if you want to learn how to speak Spanish, make sure to check out BaseLang.com, where you can get access to unlimited one-on-one Spanish classes with native speaking teachers, all via Zoom. Without further ado, let's explore our first type of reflexive verbs, reciprocal reflexives. As the name suggests, reciprocal reflexives are verbs that, when used with plural reflexive pronouns, indicate an action is being performed on 2 or more subjects simultaneously. Since it is always 2 or more subjects, it always includes the reflexive pronouns nos or se. Let's look at some examples. Let's take the verb saludarse, to greet each other. If we put it in a sentence, we would get ellos se saludan en la oficina. They say hello to each other at the office. Notice that as it's ellos or they, we use the reflexive pronoun se. Now let's use another example, contarse, to tell each other. Raquel y yo nos contamos todo. Raquel and I tell everything to each other. You'll notice that in both these examples, the closest English translation for reciprocal reflexives is action verb plus each other. Now, quick tip. In Spanish, there is no need to add reciprocal phrases or words like entre sí, el uno al otro, each other, etc. at the end of the sentence, as reciprocal reflexives already tell us that the action is being performed by two subjects on each other. One of the only reasons you might use these words is to emphasize who is receiving the action. For example, Patricia y Damián se aman el uno al otro. They love each other. Before we look at the next section, natural reflexive verbs, make sure you use those quick reflexes and hit that subscribe button down below. Done? Great. Time to explore natural reflexives. It's all in the name. These verbs are reflexive by nature. It's important to note that these are not routine verbs, but they are verbs that can only be used with reflexive pronouns. Some commonly used examples of natural reflexive verbs include adueñarse, to take ownership, casarse, to get married, and sentarse, to sit down. If you want some more examples of natural reflexive verbs, look for the full article in our description below. As we covered before, these verbs only function when used with reflexive pronouns. Let's take the verb adormilarse, to doze off. As an example, estabas adormilándote en el viaje hacia acá. You were getting sleepy on the way here. As you can see, the verb is used with the reflexive pronoun te, you were. That's all we have time for in this lesson. We covered what reflexive verbs are, the pronoun endings they use, and the two main types of reflexive verbs, reciprocal and natural. But you can find out more about the third type of non-reflexive in the full article about reflexive verbs on our website. While you're there, you can also test out what you have learned with our reflexive verbs quiz. And if you want to practice reflexive verbs with an experienced Spanish teacher, why not schedule your first BaseLang class today? At BaseLang.com, you get access to unlimited one-on-one Spanish classes with native-speaking teachers, all via Zoom. Try your first week for only $1. Thanks for watching! Now that you've got another string to your bow when it comes to making conversation, why not check out our video on 5 different phrases to strike up a conversation in Spanish? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more free Spanish lessons and expert advice.